I don't ruin moods.
No, that's not you.
We should debrief.
I was not.
Group therapy.
I knew that All Quiet on the Western Front probably wasn't gonna have a happy ending, but it is just really so tragic. That final scene of him reaching out for the butterfly and just getting shot.
I knew he died, but I was I didn't know he was reaching for a butterfly.
Yeah,
And then especially because he would they had had the scene before with him and his sister and the butterflies.
Yeah.
And so it's just oh my god, they really
I don't know if you guys saw the cover of the thing for All Quiet on the Western Front. It's the butterfly in the hand coming in.
Yeah, I did see that, and I was like, "What is the butterfly?
Yeah.
When is that gonna come into play?"
It's gonna fall on you like a ton of bricks.
the symbol.
They could have been even cooler if the butterflies offered out.
Yeah, that's true.
I wonder if the versions do that.
No, there was a 1980s version, American version with Richard Thomas, John Boy from the Waltons, which means nothing to you guys, I'm sure. But yes, and then there was another version pretty recently.
Yeah, just in since 2020, wasn't it?
I would guess that seems too late to me, but maybe 2019 or 2018 or something.
2022.
Oh, okay.
I saw it.
But it's that one. I didn't see that one, but I've heard it goes for cinematic.
Yeah.
It's German. It's in German.
Yeah.
Oh.
But I understand that I don't remember what the criticism was. Something about the plot and the character development they thought was just flat. It's just all flash and image.
Okay.
But I don't know. I haven't seen it.
I feel like it won something.
Yeah. Sure.
Not the war.
That's not.
It's not like Academy Awards mean anything.
I saw a clip of one movie where at the end it was a different ending where he wasn't reaching toward a butterfly, but instead he was drawing, I think it was a bird, and then he got sniped, and the focus was just on a piece of paper in his hand. The whole time it was just it cut to the soldier prepared to shoot, and then just went to the paper in his hand.
All right, well, we've started talking about All Quiet on the Western Front. Let's talk about All Quiet on the Western Front. What did you get out of it? What did you make of it?
It's a really good anti-war film.
It is definitely an anti-war film, and I want to reiterate that some of the films we're going to watch in here are pro-war, and some of the films are anti-war. This is definitely in the anti-war category, and this is because most of the people involved were war veterans, World War I veterans who really, and one of the things we're going to sort of talk about, and it was in the movie a little bit, is that World War I veterans really felt like they could not talk about what had happened, that people just didn't understand them. And you saw that with, the men in the bar trying to tell him how to win the war, and he didn't feel like he belonged there. So that was one of the big things, was that World War I veterans didn't think they could express what they had experienced, that nobody could understand it if they hadn't been there. And this movie and the novel, and there's a whole slew of other novels. I mean, the Vieira novel article that we read today mentions a bunch of other novels like Henri Barbusse's Le Feu, and just endless numbers of novels that all tried to express that, what happened, right? But it was just hard to express. Listen.
I also kind of like the scene where he was talking to the schoolboys, and they were calling him a coward and stuff.
Yeah.
That's such a great side by side of the bourgeois masculinity view of war and the actual reality of war, being something completely different. And it's they all wanted him to say that it's war is some glorious thing. They all expected him to say that, and so I just think that is very interesting, because it's they have such a strong preconceived notion of what war is that they couldn't really even fathom the idea that a veteran from the war, soldier actually, the war wasn't over,
Yeah.
would have an entirely different perspective.
Yeah, and
They
that's
believe
a
it
big
wrong.
that's a big point about how culture functions. Culture gives you a set of categories and a set of ideas about how the world works. And you often adopt these without realizing. The culture feeds them to you through movies and books and things your parents say and et cetera. And you learn this is how the world works. And when you run into something that doesn't fit that, it's often very hard to sort of fathom it, to understand it, to comprehend it. And your first impulse is to say, no, that can't be right. Right? Kylie?
I thought it was interesting that the moment Cat had to rely on like somebody else, Paul, for his survival was when he died. The entire war, he was being self-sufficient, and he needed help. That's what got him.
Yeah,
in the end.
yeah. Why?
There's a complete reversal of like role shifts between Paul coming in as this very naive boy essentially, and then having to take care and looking at these other boys that are 16, much younger than him. What are you doing here? And that's the same thing you were seeing with Kat early on in the film. So the role is completely reversed due to the state of warfare.
This brings up one of the big tropes of war literature, which is that war is coming of age turns boys into men, and this even comes through here, except that nobody survives the process here. But that's a theme that's going to come through over and over again here.
Kind of along that line, something that I was like noticing is that the tactics that they use to get people to join up are still very similar to what they do now. But instead of focusing on the upper class of people, we've shifted it down to the lower class because they have less, and they'll actually get the like experience of the honor and the money and all of that out of it versus the higher class.
This is more of a film motif, but I liked how, well, I didn't like, I thought it was an interesting choice to have the boots constantly shift between different people.
That was that little like scene where it was like he got the boots, he's so crying, and then the next day he's like smiling, wearing his boots, so happy, and then he immediately dies. A new person smiling, wearing the boots, like that was like so tragic, but like.
I was instantly thinking they're cursed 100%. Like, just don't leave the boots.
They are totally cursed.
And
Yes.
so in my notes when I'm watching my new class, I'll like take little guesses or stuff like that, and I was like, are the boots cursed? Next line, yes.
Well, then just like the little peaks of joy they can like are trying to like eke out of this. Like he's happy that like now his feet won't hurt because he has these like nice, well-made boots instead of his like crappy old boots.
Mm-hmm.
But like at the end of the day, it's so quickly it's meaningless because he's just gonna get like chewed up by the war anyways.
Right. Any other thoughts on the movie? I realized I misspoke. I mentioned the next film was The Grand Illusion, but I have realized that I dropped that from the syllabus last time I taught this course because I got sick of the bad sound quality. So we're going straight to Gallipoli this time. So we'll start Gallipoli today. Listen.
I also think it's interesting how there were two scenes of a place like pre-shelling and post-shelling.
Mm-hmm.
Both were cathedrals, actually. I think there was a cathedral with the graveyard, and then the second cathedral with like the soldiers marching by it. And I just think that was like a very like the point got across so quickly and very well. I think about like just how fast like something that's just a place, like a church, basically just gets reduced to a war zone. And it's like it's like the graves there and the trees weren't like, memories of dead people and like beautiful life, but were instead like potential debris if a shell landed nearby, or like something to hide behind to get cover or something like that. And it all just became like entirely just the practical, like any of the symbolic, any of the like emotional undertones were just like gone, and it was entirely what can help each person survive and kill the enemy.
Oh. Okay.
Is it the fact he used like a blown up like a coffin to like kind of like have high under was very impactful. Because like they're so used to death, the idea of like something kind of like so like just everyone else like a coffin that's freaky. Like don't look at like that's scary. Like, he was just like high under that.
Yeah, there's actually going to be a weird use of that in a long engagement also. But
The scene where he killed the French soldier, stabbed him, and then sat with him so long, I think was really impactful. It demonstrated like how he was forced to kill people, and then Paul did not want to do it, and he really felt guilty about it. And then how he was, because he took on that masculinity of, now I killed somebody, I did what I had to do, but I should do something else to care for this man. I should wrap him up. I should take his effects out and try to care for his wife and his children. I'll write to them. Just forgive me. And I think that was really deep.
Well, I noticed like in this movie, whenever any of the characters, especially whenever like the younger boys had to like sit and think about like what they were doing, or they like were thinking about it, like that was like just too much. Like you couldn't like that's when they would go crazy or like break down or something. Like they couldn't, like it was very good at showing like you have to like turn off like the introspection and like ruminating on all this. Like you just have to like be in the moment and doing like the thing, because like it's just so, it's too much like, I don't know, like trauma or horror or something to like actually be like trying to process it in the moment.
yeah, this is actually what you just mentioned is actually has a class element that almost all of the literature written by war veterans about the war was written by middle class because they had an education. That's why they wrote books about it. But there was a definite sense, and it's a theme that comes through in the literature, that the working class men did better because they weren't introspective. Their whole lives had just been like, shut down your emotions and do what you got to do and get through it. It sucks. And so they were ready. This was their moment, right? They could do like Kat did and just keep plowing ahead and without being scarred by it. But the middle class guys would reflect on it and think about it and really, engage with it emotionally. And they were sensitive to it.
What they were doing before the war was being in the gymnasium. Like at the time, like they were reading a lot of like what they were doing was reading and thinking about like stuff. Like that's like probably what their educations looked like. So like to go to war, like what you've been trained to do is think about things, but now what you need to be doing is not thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed what was on the blackboard behind the teacher in the opening scene. It was Greek. It was all Greek.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a perfect snapshot of gymnasiums, because what they learned is Latin and Greek. They read Homer, they read Cicero, they read, Aeneas, and Virgil, the Iliad, or the Aeneid, and their whole education was just reading Greek tragedies and Roman philosophy
and like thinking about it. Like like they've been trained to like think deeply about things. But I don't know about other wars, but it would seem in World War I, being in the trenches, thinking deeply about your existence is not gonna be psychologically boosting.
Yeah, I will say one odd side note on World War I is that when J.R.R. Tolkien was in the trenches in World War I, he spent his time developing a fake language called Elvish.
Well, and you know what? That's probably, keep your mind up, everything going on around you.
Yeah.
You're in your own little mental
It
world.
sounds like he was a little bit more successful.
I mean, I think that the fact that he didn't go crazy and or die shows that coming up with fantasy languages when you're stuck in the trenches might actually work.
Wyatt.
I mean, I like how when they sit down and eat, and then they do start thinking a little bit, and they start thinking about what is the purpose of this war, and then kind of making fun of like the Kaiser and the different nations for engaging in this. And there is that sense of realization that there really is no point to this. It is just heads of state playing, this really elaborate game with each other with these pawns essentially. And there's that sense of realization, but then there's nothing they can do about it.
Right, except to go visit their friend in the hospital. Kelly.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to bring up, but like the end of the Lord of the Rings in particular, when Frodo comes back, but he can't.
Yeah, he can't connect. That was totally Tolkien, the World War I veteran, laying that out there. Well, what about the Vieira article? What did you think of the Vieira article? He lays out an interesting little way of thinking about this, which
I think it's interesting, especially like in the world wars and the past feel like the biggest lie that's been told is that asymmetrical like predation combat has glory in it.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like that's kind of how like people still keep getting like sucked into it even after like a century of being like, oh my god, the horrors of war, playing with like the industrialization of it. I think it's crazy that there's still ideas of glory.
Yeah.
I think that like relating war and human history to non-human nature was like really interesting because like it kind of also showed that there is no species that is like too like undeveloped or like uncivilized or whatever for war. Like it's everywhere, and like even if it's not technically like war as we define it, except with ants, like there's conflict, there's murder, there's like
Violence.
yeah, there's violence in between species, within species, like all the time, and like humans aren't special that way. And then I also think that like the separation between like fighting, I don't remember exactly what he called it, and predation, and like how human conflicts have like gone from one side to the other and back again over history. It's,
Sure.
like,
Let's just lay out real quick what the basic thing he's talking about. He's talking about intraspecies.
Intraspecific. That's the real fancy way.
I'll say intraspecific. And then, so what's the difference between those two? Just to make sure we're clear. Okay.
Predation is like unrestrained violence.
For what purpose?
For the purpose of like continuing your species or like eating or something.
Yeah, for eating basically.
And intraspecific combat is just like ritualized fighting within a species, usually to like assert dominance.
Mm-hmm. Right, so interspecies combat or violence is basically you think of the males of species, rams butting their heads together, or deers bucks locking horns, or et cetera. All those ways that males of species have this sort of ritualized combat, if you will, to see who's dominant. But as Vieira points out, there's usually a specialized weapon for it, antlers or horns or whatever, and they don't use that to fight off predators. And so it's very ritualized. It's very limited in the number of weapons you can use, and it is not intended to kill. It's intended to show dominance, right? And so Vieira's point is that if you look at ancient Greek warfare, like the Odyssey or the Iliad, you can see this form of warfare, this intraspecific combat. It's about mano a mano, hand-to-hand combat. You got to use honorable weapons like swords. It has to be even weapons. We've got to both have equal chances. And I was talking about the duel a while ago. This is totally the duel.
Yeah, the duel.
Where there's supposed to be the possibility of severe injury or death, but it's not supposed to be common enough to make this a deadly endeavor. It's supposed to just happen once in a while to sort of, exception proves the rule, so to speak. And this, a lot of warfare, this is one of the key ideas sort of in why the teenage students were yelling coward at Paul Baumer, and because they were like, no, that's what warfare is. It's about dominance, and if you're coming back and saying you aren't asserting dominance, you must be losing, you must be a coward, you must be on the wrong side, you must not be a real man. So that understanding of warfare is definitely there. And as Vieira points out, it's been going away for a long, long time because human beings keep inventing new weapons that don't fit this model. But it is not, it hasn't gone away. It keeps sort of haunting masculinity, if you will, that you're supposed to do these sort of ritual forms of violence, this sort of tests of manhood against other men, one-on-one with even weapons, et cetera, to find out who's better. And then predation. What about predation? What is predation? I mean, it's obviously hunting animals to eat them. Eric.
Matter of fact, killing.
Okay, matter of fact killing. And that, yeah, listen.
It's also like killing for survival and not for honor. Like there's no, it's like whatever's effective, there's not really any consideration for whatever is honorable.
Okay. So this is, predation is throwing a hand grenade into the river to catch all the fish rather than using a sporting lure instead of, which gives the fish a fighting chance. So predation is about killing, and it's about killing as efficiently as possible because you're killing to eat, and you need to eat to survive, so you're not going to mess around with this. This you need to live, so you're going to kill as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, and as he points out, although there are lots and lots of ways to do it, in the natural world, it basically boils down to poison or puncturing. And so predation is a form of violence that is about killing as efficiently as possible. There is no sense of symmetry, right?
Yeah.
The deer and the lion are not, or the impala and the lion are not equipped with the same weapons, and it's really not an equal fight, right? Listen.
I mean, I do kind of want to push back against the thing of like puncturing or poison because like there are way more like there are a lot of, and I know that you could have gotten into this, but there are a lot of other ways that like animals do that. They get creative, and like constrictor snakes, for example, like they don't really use either.
That's true. They do just squeeze, suffocate. And there are, there are forms of predation by water animals that grab birds and things and just bring them underwater until they drown, and so.
And I think with puncturing, what he's getting at is just like sharp claws or fangs or something. Because any sort of like scratching or biting and stuff would all be puncturing.
So Vera's point is that 20th century wars are wars characterized by predation, not interspecific ritualized combat.
Also kind of on the same topic of like puncturing and poison, like that's also what's being used in modern warfare. Like
Yes.
guns are literally just punch a hole in something.
So are high explosive artillery shells. They
Exactly.
just
Like
throw
poison
shrapnel
gas is
everywhere.
literally poison.
Yeah.
In the name.
Nukes are a bit of both, I guess.
The one exception is nuclear weapons, which use radiation kill.
Which is poison, essentially.
I guess.
It's not an efficient poison.
Well, also nuclear weapons will vaporize you,
Yeah.
which is
I guess the ultimate puncture, just a big hole where you used to be.
Or a hole in time and space. Okay, so do you buy? I mean, does it fit? He mentions All Quiet on the Western Front explicitly as he's talking about the novel, not the movie. But does this fit?
I think it mostly does fit, but it's not really, it's kind of a question, but he doesn't mention sacking.
He does sacking.
Yeah,
What is sacking?
because, I mean.
When you conquer a city and you go through and steal everything
yeah.
and rape all the women and drink all the alcohol and burn stuff down.
Oh, it's like an older form.
Because he's talking about like the Second World War and how that had a lot of civilian casualties, but then like one of the parts I find most fascinating about the Trojan War, one of the parts that is the most famous is the Trojan horse and the sacking of Troy after the ritualized combat is so much like the entire city's burned to the ground and we have the burn layer.
I would guess, I don't know, that Vieira would say that is an extension of dominance behavior. That once you have dominated your opponent, you get to rape his woman, burn down his city, drink his alcohol, steal all his stuff. So it is a form of ritualized assertion of dominance, right? You can't stop me now. The Goldstein book, in fact, we're going to talk about it much later in the course, but the Goldstein book talks about rape as a part of war, as a way of showing dominance, a form of masculinity, of basically insulting the losing side's men. You can't protect your women anymore. I can rape them with impunity. You can't stop me, which is supposed to be an extra humiliation for the men who couldn't stop them. Which of course has all sorts of implications about patriarchy and ownership for women and all the rest. Any thoughts on Vieira? Yeah, listen.
I also think that something that's interesting about like modern warfare is that there is no side that's like just the predators, because like everybody is just prey, but they're also preying on each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it's like they're both they're just trying to survive against the other predators, but also killing them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah,
And-
the predator is almost
Yeah.
just like war itself.
Yeah, like the predators are like the leaders who are like commanding everybody else to kill each other, basically.
One of the things that's kind of interesting is that, and the role of the airplane in this is kind of interesting because on the one hand it becomes a form of
Yeah.
predation, right? You're just bombing cities flat,
Yeah,
and
raping
you know,
bombs.
and you know, firebombing, etc. is just about killing as efficiently as possible. But in World War I, the only group that really got celebrated as heroes was the pilots, and that's because aerial combat between airplanes is pretty close to this. You have equal sides, you both have airplanes, you both have the same guns, and it's about skill and who's going to win, and it's often one-on-one combat. It's not, I mean, not always, but often enough that this took on the aura of, you know,
Well,
man-to-man combat.
what was
predominantly.
interesting about like doing the three different wars in the 20th century was how there's kind of like it wasn't like a clean line of like, oh, the 20th century started and now these are wars of predation, because like just as like there was like predatory elements to wars before that, but like the like kind of gradual shift into like in World War I, there was still kind of like a ideology about like this is an honorable thing, and like there were elements of it that like still kind of retained that, or people felt that. But like as you get to like World War II, and then especially Vietnam, like the kind of like feeling of like any sort of like ritual or honorable warfare is just gone. Like when the descriptions of Vietnam with like, especially because it was a guerrilla war, and like you never saw your enemy's faces, like, and neither side really was seeing their enemy's faces. Like one side was just getting bombed and like chemical sprayed down, the other was falling into traps and like getting ambushed in like silence. So it's like feels like animalistic predation in the fact that like it's like stalker predation, where like a tiger's just jumping out and like it's their prey's dead before they even realize what's happening to them.
Yeah. Also, I feel like something that's interesting is looking at like colonization and how much different that was from World War I. Because like in colonization, it's like the Europeans were entirely just the predators. Like all the time, there was nothing, like they were never the prey.
Yeah.
But then as soon as World War I started, just like they suddenly are the prey all the time.
Right, and I think that's a really good observation, is that the colonial mindset, that form of masculinity, was as maybe a predator, that they didn't even see Africans or Asians or whatever as worthwhile opponents. They were just something you dominated, and so they saw themselves as predators, not prey, and then they suddenly find themselves as both predators and prey.
Well, and even like this article, at least, like even connected it all the way back to like the Crusades. Like the church was against using bows and crossbows in Europe, but
Elsewhere.
the holy knights were getting loaded up with crossbows to go to the Middle East.
Sure, kind of.
I mean, there's that one scene where they're talking about like, why don't we just throw all the kings in a field and let them duke it out? Which they were just describing like combat.
Yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
even though they had that idea of like virtual masculinity and like having that idea of dominance and honor, but they were still like, the easiest way we could solve this was if we just shoved the kings in a field and said, here, solve your own problems, stop sending us into the meat grinder.
Yeah.
And also taking, I think they also mentioned taking both the clothes, like making it completely even.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, going off of that, I feel like in some way, for the heads of state, people that are actually fighting this, it's almost interest specific, because you've got all these different armies, and the armies are kind of equal. I mean, part of the reason they went to war is because they were all fearful of each other, because they were building these great big armies, and so in some way they were equally matched with these same weapons. And in some way I feel, especially because Germany was an instigator of the First World War, the Kaiser, I know, had problems with masculinity. He had an arm defect that rendered his, I think it was his right arm, useless. And he also had a very poor relationship with his mother, which wasn't great. And then there's even scandals of like homosexuality and stuff. And so I feel like when he's coming to head with his cousins, Britain and Russia, in some aspect, it's I just want to prove my masculinity, and here's my weapon. It's just the entire population of my country.
Yeah.
And so
And a couple allies.
yeah, and so in some way, even though the means are very predatory, it's actually almost dualistic in a larger sense.
Well, I think the scene that Kylie was mentioning where they were saying they'll have the kings fight it out, it started off with one guy saying one country offends another. And
Well, yeah, that was. I
about-
really like that scene where it's like, why did this war even start? And they're like, one country offends another, and they're like, well, how can a mountain in France offend a valley in Germany?
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, no, one people offends another, and they're like, well, I shouldn't be here, then I'm not offended.
Right.
And then I really liked when, I think it was Chadin, the guy was like, well, me and the Kaiser are on the same page, neither of us want this war. And like he keeps saying, well, the Kaiser and me don't agree with, like kind of being like, and very cheeky about it. Like,
Yeah.
I just like love the idea that like, they're talking about it and they're like, yeah, there is no final answer to why did this war start? It started because no, who knows? Because maybe the three cousins got so upset with each other that they said, well, let's see whose guns are bigger. And their guns are millions of civilians.
The one thing that's kind of interesting about that is that what he's alluding to in that is that there really was a sense in European diplomacy up until World War I that a nation had honor, that you could offend a nation's honor. And this is essentially an extension of masculinity to the whole nation. The idea that in the same way you can offend somebody and then they challenge you to a duel, you can offend a country and they challenge you to a war. And so there was a really similar language about that, in a sense that, the Kaiser is asserting his masculinity. He is saying, you can't insult me, I'm a man. And Nicholas II is saying the same. But that dies with World War I. It really, I'll get into it later, but there's a real movement after World War I to outlaw aggressive wars and wars about honor.
As would make sense.